The Center for Human Systems presents the Leadership and Self-Mastery Program. This is the second module of the 3 keys to building effective relationships. Enjoy.
So today we're going to continue talking about contracting. And in this second module of this course, we're going to focus on on agreements that to build and maintain effective relationships. Michael, what's the big idea of today's module?
Hello, Ronnie. The big idea is that effective leadership requires relationships that work. Too often misunderstandings and miscommunications get in the way. Good contracting around having healthy relationships can prevent that. The goal here is to assure and build effective communication and trust.
Well, let's just first remind everyone what is meant by contracting that what we discussed in the last episode.
Sure, contracting is great for being sure that everyone is on the same page and going to the same place. It's about defining who will do what by when. As we talked about in the previous module, this allows for good accountability. It's also about the behaviors that build strong relationships, which we're going to focus on today, and effective ego management, which we will focus on in the next module.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit more about what you mean by relationship management or maintaining and building strong relationships.
Sure. When we learned about the 3 keys of conscious use of self, we talked about connecting. Once we've connected, we need to manage the quality of that relationship. The higher the quality of trust, the more likely the person will allow us to influence them. There are times when we run into unexpected resistance or hostility from the people that we are connected to. When that happens, there has often been a failure on our part of having maintained the quality of relationship that is necessary to the success that we want. Doing so is what we are calling relationship management. When that happens, we can no longer count on that person to help us achieve our goals.
Okay. So let's talk about specifically what we should contract for in relationship management.
Sure. We want agreements regarding active listening and straight talk. We want agreements around feedback that will assure that we maintain our mutual understanding that is achieved through regarding how we behave with each other to maintain healthy and supportive relationships. Contracting to give each other feedback is super important. It allows all parties to the agreement to let each other know and discuss how well the agreements are being kept or not.
Michael, can I just interrupt you really quickly? You use 2 terms, active listening and straight talk. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Sure. By active listening, we're talking about paying attention to what the other person is saying rather than paying attention to what maybe you want to say next. It's really about attending to the person that you are listening to rather than attending to the thoughts in your mind. Straight talk is about saying things in ways that are clear, concise, that aren't full of the thrills of being being overly polite so that the meaning does not get lost. Does that help?
Yes, it does. So, Michael, do you have an example for us about building supportive relationships?
Yes, I do. Actually, we will use the example of the CEO from the major health system we talked about in the previous module, where he had taken his executive team away and they knew a strategic plan that was not being well supported, and I was asked to help him out. A major problem in that situation was when he asked if folks were on board, folks kind of nodded their head. Some folks were silent, which he accepted as consent, which is hardly ever true. What we needed to do was get at the issue where his folks were really concerned about saying something that was different than what he wanted. So it seemed too risky to them to speak up. So therefore, he was not getting the feedback that he needed to say that everybody really was not on board. So we needed to develop a new set of agreements around, particularly when an important organizational decision is being made, that everyone needed to be upfront and direct about where they are about the decision that they will need to support. They also agreed that silence is never acceptable in such situations. That part of their job of being on this team was to speak up when things aren't going quite the way they thought they should.
Yes, and you had, I think this is a really important point that you had brought up in our previous module, is that silence is not straight talk. Silence is not consent, or agreement of any kind. And both the leaders and the individuals that are part of the conversation need to recognize that.
Yes. Silence typically is a sign of people feeling uncomfortable with speaking up. So now it may not always mean that, but the key is you don't know what it really means and you need to ask. But if you do what this group did, that they came up with an agreement that everybody had the obligation to speak up. That was very, very important.
So, how did this continue with your example and tell us how this group got back on track?
Sure. So during that first day, they really began to talk about the issues that caused them not to speak up. So they asked their boss to behave in certain different ways, to be more open to disagreements. Uh, they agreed to actively listen to each other better. This is something that they thought that their boss, the CEO, really needed to do. So that he would give them signals of, yes, I heard you, and would respond to whatever they said so that they knew where he was about whatever they said. They talked about being curious before going to judgment. It's when we go to judgment where, the boss is really screwing up again without saying it, that things get worse. Through being curious, you go, uh, sir, I would like you to be a little clearer about what you just said. Uh, the part I'm having trouble with is X, Y, and Z. Finally, they talked about proactively supporting each other to follow through with these agreements. Finally, they agreed to offer each other feedback regarding how well the new agreements were being kept. What they were doing was listing new team norms. If they follow through with those things on that list, they will have established the new norms. Just making a list is never enough. So many groups think that just by making a list that they have set the norms. Norms are not set until people are actually behaving that way, until the group is behaving that way. And then they talked a bit about that feedback is also necessary for accountability. These were by no means comfortable conversations. The CEO was uncomfortable, and getting a bit anxious. Everybody was anxious. But as we began to get things up on the table and get them resolved, everybody began to relax and things started going much, much, much more smoothly. Old conflicts were resolved that should have been handled months ago.
Michael, once again, I come back to this question that I'm always asked. Maybe I'm just fundamentally lazy, but are you saying that every time I lead a team or even just join a team, that I contract for how I want people to listen to me or how I want them to behave? I mean, it just feels like just a ton of work. And I just expect people to be behaving in a professional manner. And that's a sort of, and that's kind of dictated by the organization that I'm a part of.
Well, there are two issues here. One is the question of every time. And the answer is no, you don't need to do it every time. You do need to do it every time that you have an important situation at hand. It's just a routine conversation. Things are going basically very well and smoothly, no big deal. But if we're talking about something as important as a strategic plan, you need to bite the bullet and do these things. Now, the other thing is you mentioned that you expect people to act in a professional manner. This is actually the crux of the issue. Expecting people to act in a professional manner is your expectation, and unless you contract for it, you may not get it. Different people have very different images of what a professional manner looks like, just as different people have very different images of what being respectful look like. Time after time, I'm working people through a conflict, and they say, I want you to respect me without being clear about what those terms actually look like to them. And once we can get clear about that, folks go, oh, sure, I can do that. But it's the expectation without it being clarified that causes the problem. Expectations are the source of upsets.
Okay.
Unmet expectations are the source of upsets, and they will often become unmet when we have not spoken to them.
Right. So, there's a lot that you said there that I just wanted to recap and maybe ask another couple questions on. Um, you know, the I've entered into organizations where I'm expected to act in a certain manner and or do things in a certain manner. And often what's underlying that is this is the way we always do things around here, right? That's what is meant by their norms. And anything that my even being there goes against those norms. And so when I start asking questions or clarifying things, that is a lot of people see that as um, disruptive to them and disruptive to the work. So that's one thing, just a comment. And then,
Let me comment on that a bit. The norms of many organizations are dysfunctional. And when you have a dysfunctional norm, such as there's certain things that you're not supposed to speak up about, that's a norm that needs to change. Now, changing norms can be tricky business. The question that I will ask of you when you're in a situation, do you have, is part of your employment contract to help to change dysfunctional norms? If not, be clear that unless you can get that to be part of your contract by talking to your boss, that then you are asking for trouble.
Yeah, I often ask for trouble. So you're saying that, I mean, I have done this. Where I've gone into organizations and I'm like, we need to change the way we do things around here. And everyone resists me. So what I hear you saying is probably when I join an organization that I don't have the relationships. And I also haven't contracted for intention, to come back to the sort of terminology that we're using in this course. I haven't built the relationships and I haven't contracted with the organization, my boss, my colleagues, around the intentions, around what my role is in the organization. So I'm taking on a job that nobody wants done, and I'm hitting my head against a wall. So I'm
Well, the answer is yes. That if you truly want to change a culture, you need to build a set of relationships to critical mass, which we're going to talk about in, I think, course that are a little bit further down the road, so that you have the support to do it, and it helps to have the support of your boss, which is a contract with him or her.
okay.
Otherwise, you're just asking to beat your head up against a brick wall.
That is absolutely true, and my head hurts as a result of that.
Mm.
So, just to come back to what we're talking about here, what we've been discussing is, you need to do the you need to do the things around building. You need to have the relationship conversations about behaviors and what we expect of each other. Most importantly, before a major decision is made, or a major discussion needs to be happening. Did I say
Yeah.
that right? Okay.
Yes.
And
Uh, it actually should be done whenever a team is forming.
okay, and then
Now,
kind of revisited.
yes, then it needs to be revisited whenever a new member comes into that team so that everybody is clear about these are our norms and we are conscious about these norms. We pick them consciously rather than so many times norms just get set on automatic. And that's so often when they become dysfunctional.
I also heard you say we also need to revisit them when there's a big strategic decision to be made, that we just recap and remind everyone of the norms around active listening or straight talk or whatever we have agreed to as a group or a team.
Absolutely. Effective communication is what we're after. And that happens when people are listening to each other, are being straightforward with each other, and giving each other feedback.
Great. Thank you for that, Michael.
Sure.